I told the people who came to the Point service 2 weeks ago that I was saved in a church in Amsterdam 5 years ago. Now, it might seem strange to begin a message in a humanist service like that, but it was not in the way that you probably think. It was 2011, and I was a presenter at a conference in Holland, and since I was flying all the way to Holland, I decided I'd tack on an extra day so that I could enjoy a little time in Amsterdam, and it turned out I had 36 hours in one of the world's great cities, and I rented a bicycle, and I rode all over the city, and every once in a while I would see on some wall somewhere plastered these posters of various concerts and musicians and people who are going to be coming and playing there in Amsterdam. So I saw some great music that was coming up, and I wondered, I wonder if anyone is playing anything is tonight, this one evening that I'm going to have in Amsterdam. And yes, it turns out there was. It was not classical music, it wasn't jazz music or blues or rock and roll. Have you ever heard of the pioneers of punk music, a band called the Sex Pistols? Yeah? All right. So they were an incredibly controversial band back in the 1970s, yet to this day they're considered one of the most influential bands in popular music. The lead singer went by the name of Johnny Rotten. I suppose you've heard of Johnny Rotten. The bass player, who died of a heroin overdose, was known as Sid Vicious. Yeah. They were infamous in their time for their concerts breaking into mayhem and pandemonium. They touted anarchy, anti-conformity, anti-authoritarianism, and religious irreverence. They were known for being foul-mouthed, disgusting, rude, and violent. Well, as I looked at the concert posters in Amsterdam, I saw that Johnny Rotten and his new band, PIL, was going to be playing at the Paradiso Theater right in the center of Amsterdam. And as it turns out, the Paradiso is an old church that's been converted into a concert venue. I guess less and less people are going to church in Holland these days. So it was going to be my only opportunity to hear live music, or to go to church for that matter, while I was there. So I thought to myself, why not? Living in Tulsa, when am I going to have a chance to see a concert like this? And so as the sun was setting over Amsterdam, I followed a crowd of orange spiked hair and combat boots into the Paradiso. Before that, I didn't know that you could get so many piercings into one nose or one ear. If there were 1,000 people at this concert, there were at least 20,000 piercings. I began the night in the back of the theater. It was so loud and it was so chaotic that in the first 10 minutes, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to stay. But after a few songs, I noticed that my head started bopping a little bit. My shoulders started to move with the crowd. Before long, a mosh pit formed in the front of the theater. For those who aren't familiar with punk music, a mosh pit is what happens when a crowd starts slam dancing, which means they start bumping into each other and dancing in a big swirl of jumping and bumping and spinning. And as you can imagine, the slam dancers sometimes come flying out of the mosh pit. And when this happens, the people who are standing around the edge, they push them back in. It is something to behold if you have not seen that. The music was loud, it was aggressive, it was angry, and the banter was sometimes very offensive. There were moments when I could feel that if the musicians, that they had the crowd at a point where if they wanted to crank up the volume and the offensiveness just a little bit more, they could turn the entire place into a riot. It was both scary and thrilling at the same time. I decided to trust that the musicians were not going to do this. And I began to relax and I began to enjoy the incredible energy and the rhythm of the music and the dancing. Before long, I found myself drawn to the mosh pit like a moth to a flame. I could see that even though it was very physical and chaotic, that there was a kind of order to the disorder. And so when the moment was right, I waded into this sea of thrashing arms and legs and bodies that were swirling and jumping and banging into each other. At one point, I was knocked off balance and I fell to the ground. And just as I was thinking to myself that I am about to be trampled by this exuberant combat boot-wearing crowd, I noticed 3 sets of arms reaching down to pull me up. And I remembered from my teens when I had first experienced a mosh pit that this is the culture. And I was saved. You see, right there in a church in Amsterdam, with the help of these strangers, in just a few seconds, I was back on my feet. And what I realized, that in such dancing, everyone involved knows that at any moment, it could be them who gets knocked off balance and onto the ground, and nobody wants to get hurt, and nobody wants to hurt anybody. And so whenever someone falls, the people closest reach out and they help them back up. At one point, I thought to myself, Marlin, what are you doing? You're 42 years old, you're a minister for God's sakes, and here you are slam dancing at a punk rock concert in Amsterdam. And at that moment, I realized that it's not that different from life. Life is a lot like a mosh pit. Whether we like to admit it or not, everyone knows that at any moment, it could be us who gets knocked off balance and onto the ground. A diagnosis, a stroke, a heart attack, a friend or relative dies, our finances crash, our company fails or is sold, or one way or another we're handed a pink slip. Crime happens, people get assaulted. These days we also worry about terrorism and gun violence, or losing our sobriety, losing our minds or our memories, a miscarriage, a depression, a betrayal, or a scary person being elected president. There are a lot of ways that we can get knocked on this dance floor, knocked down. And when it happens, we need other people to help pick us back up. We have to learn to trust both in other people and how to be in community. A lot of times, these situations put us into the unknown, and we find ourselves having to count on strangers. It could be caregivers, nurses, or doctors who we've never met before, who suddenly are in our business, poking and prodding and probing and asking all kinds of personal questions. And suddenly, our life depends on them, or our loved one's life. If we're changing careers, we often have to put our livelihood in the hands of some people we don't know or don't know very well. Or we join a support group with a whole bunch of people we've never met before. It's not so different from being in that mosh pit in Amsterdam. When I fell down, I was counting on the fact that someone would notice and would help, someone who I didn't know, probably didn't even speak the same language, someone who had never seen me before, someone who did not know my political leanings or my religious convictions, someone who did not know me from Adam. I had to trust that some stranger would save my life, or at least keep me from harm. Part of learning to live freely and fully is learning to trust. If we cannot trust, we cannot love. And love is often what saves us. Now, I'm not talking about being saved from some scary hell after we die. The whole idea of a supernatural, personal God who judges us and punishes us and tortures people eternally because they did not believe in the right things is preposterous to me. But what I do know, because I've seen it with my own eyes every day, is that there are a lot of people living in hell right here in this world. Being hungry and malnourished is hell. Living in an abusive home or relationship is hell. Being addicted to things that are harming you and others is hell. Feeling like your life has no meaning or value is hell. Learning that you and your children have been drinking lead-poisoned water is hell. Fearing the police might shoot you or your children even when you're not posing any real threat is hell. Feeling abandoned, betrayed, victimized is hell. Or losing your faculties or your memory or watching your loved one deteriorating can be hell. These are the very real hells that we know. We know they exist, and religion and community ought to be focused on these hells that we see with our own eyes every day and stop being caught up worrying about some imaginary hell that happens when this life is over. That is just a big distraction. But why is it that people buy the distraction? In part because we're afraid to feel the vulnerability of being alive. And so we can distract ourselves with religious intoxication when we feel self-righteous and think that we have a purpose to save ourselves and everyone else from hell in the next life. That will keep someone busy. It will infuse their life with a sense of ultimate purpose and meaning and value. It might make them very hard to live with. There are 10,000 other forms of distraction. Drinking, smoking pot, gambling, sex, compulsive eating, video games, you name it. Now, I don't think any of these are bad in moderation. And I'd be the last minister to stand up before a congregation in a pulpit and with a sanctimonious message about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or even punk music, for that matter. But when all of these things are being used, when any of these things are being used chronically or habitually as a way of hiding from our vulnerability, then they become blocks. They keep us from being able to fully give or receive love. And love is what saves us. Especially when the medicine or money or anything else can't. Love is what saves us. Love is the one thing that makes a world like this livable. And if we're honest and we're awake, then we know that we walk around every day surrounded by millions of invisible trapdoors. We don't know where they are. We don't know when we're going to fall into them or someone else is. And if we don't have love, and we don't know how to trust, how to forgive, how to give or receive kindness and generosity with humility, it can be a pretty hellish existence. Love in the broadest sense of the word, I'm not just talking about romantic love, but love which is the glue that binds us together with others, even with strangers. It saves us. Why? Because we know somehow that we are all on this dance floor together, and it's dangerous, and it can be really scary, and the stakes are high, and we cannot do this alone. And so we must learn to trust, because without trust, we cannot love. Hell is never learning how to love. As my colleague Wayne Arneson says, the road is often long and the stakes are very high, and the way is never completely clear. But the blessing is, you're not alone. I love you. Amen.
We are your church, and we are proud to be your church, or at least a church that's having a positive impact on your life. I am personally blessed to be your minister, or at least a minister who you're allowing to speak into your life. I hope you'll support our ministry and share your love beyond belief by texting LOVEBB to 41444, or go to our website. But you can just text LOVEBB to 41444 and make your gift. It's wonderful. Thank you. Be blessed and be a blessing.